welcome to camaraderie, where sometimes a step forward can feel like a step backwards, especially when you're looking back at it with the power of hindsight. This video is sponsored by the inevitable progression of time. Today, I'll be covering something a little bit different than my usual fare for this channel. Behold, a digital camera.
You are the chosen one!
Say hello to the Sony digital Mavica digital still camera MVC-FD5. It's a digital camera, but only just. You see, it doesn't take SD cards, it doesn't take compact flash, it doesn't even have any sort of internal storage. No. This camera came out in 1997, so this bad boy takes floppy disks. Yeah, just bog standard, regular old floppy disks. 3.5 inch, 1.44 megabytes. So in effect, this is basically just a floppy drive with a lens and an old VHS camcorder LCD screen slapped onto it. Quality-wise, the images that this plastic picture maker makes isn't great, neither from our posh, pampered, modern perspective, nor was it really blowing anybody away back in the day. But what it lacked in quality, it more than made up for in sheer convenience. The 640 by 480 images were a far cry from the crispy photos that film gave you, but in the burgeoning industry of the 24-hour news cycle, not needing to wait to finish a roll and then get it processed was indispensable. You just pop out the disc, toss it into a floppy drive, and you're ready to roll in a couple of minutes. Not to mention, in the ever-expanding .com landscape, the photos were already digitized and primed for uploading. In recent times, I have tried to stay away from boring myself with going over how you operate cameras every time I review a camera, because for the most part, there's just a few things you gotta know, and then you can figure the rest out from there. But since this is a newfangled invention, I figured we'd go over how to actually operate everything, and then we'll get to some example photos. Fun little tidbit, the Mavica name is, it's like, why would they call it Mavica? Magnetic video camera. That probably didn't line up at all. But yeah, they just took the first two letters from each of those words and made a little other word out of it, which is nifty. First off, the Sony magnetic video camera has an on and off switch. It's not a toggle, just a little hold it down and it makes it do what it's not currently doing action. Once you've got it powered on, you've got a whole host of different options. You can adjust the brightness on your LCD screen if you like. And you can power on your flash. You can change what you want to be displayed by pressing the display button. Yeah, I usually just leave it on, but you can do that if you want. And then you've got a little D-pad joystick thing. And that's how you get around the menus. First thing you'll notice up here in the top right, you've got your shot counter and what quality you're shooting at. I'll get to that quality here in a little bit. But yeah, it shows how many pictures you've taken and roughly how much storage space you have left. Down here you've got your battery meter to let you know how much more battery you have left. Down in the bottom left you've got 4 teal buttons that turn yellow whenever you highlight them. Lets you know which one you've got selected. The top 2 are just exposure value compensations. You have a stop and a half either way, so if your auto exposure isn't quite doing right, then you can if you don't know what exposure value compensation is, it's pretty straightforward, but basically just makes your image lighter or darker. It's kind of like a catch-all exposure adjustment rather than going through the steps of adjusting your aperture, your ISO, or your shutter speed. Got a little clock timer looking thing. That is your self timer. Helpful for timing yourself. And then you've got your menu. From here, you can do all sorts of menu things like setting your clock, turning on or off the beep, because sometimes it gets, maybe you just don't want it to beep at you whenever you're moving around the menus. Then you've got your field versus frame and your quality. I'll get to field and frame and quality here in a second, but we've got also one last button on the back, actually one more toggle thing and another switch. I don't know what to call these. You've got where your floppy drive is. It's just if you've ever used a floppy drive, you know how one of these works. If you haven't, then this is how it works. And this last little switch on the back, you've got play and camera. Right now it's on camera. That means it's doing camera things, like looking at what you're pointed at. But if you switch it over to play, it starts reading the disc that's inside. And then from here, you can actually scroll through all of your pictures. It does take a while to get from picture to picture, but it's a floppy drive. What do you expect? But that's not all you can do when you have play selected. You can also go into the menu here and either delete an image, protect an image, or just format the entire disk. And if you go to index, this will give you kind of a more broad overview of what you've got going on rather than having to go from image to image and waiting for it to load every single time. You can kind of just quickly pick what you're looking for. And then from here you can either say you want to get rid of the 2nd and 15th picture that you've shot and you just want to delete those so you can make more space without having to unload everything from your disk. Then you can go in here and then just highlight whichever ones you want to do, and then you hit enter. But I'm not going to do that because I haven't actually unloaded this floppy yet. That's pretty much it. Well, actually, no, wait, there's three more things that are pretty important. The shutter button is pretty important. You've got a little like half press action that lets you do all the normal half press things, check for exposure and lock your focus and all that kind of stuff. And you've also got a little macro little slide thing. It feels kind of clunky, but it actually works pretty all right. And up here you've got your lens. You can't change it, but it's there. You can't zoom with it, but it's there. I think it works out to about like a 47 millimeter field of view if you're comparing it to film on a standard 35 millimeter. There's a lot of math and numbers in there, but it's equivalent roughly to like a 47 millimeter lens on a normal setup. And for the battery situation, it takes an NP F550 or F570 battery. This one is by Turpow. It's not the original battery because those are long since dead, but they do still make these because these types of batteries are still readily available because I think they're used for like lights and like light panels and stuff like that. So you can still get your hands on some of these batteries. I charged this one before I went to Chicago back in September, and it still has like half of its charge left. I haven't taken it out or anything. It's just been sitting in the camera, and it's still got like 50% of the battery left. And before going out for a shoot, though, you'll need to be aware of two main settings: standard versus fine, and frame versus field. Standard quality is the standard quality, and fine is fine. Fine takes up more space on your disk, but it does give you a higher quality image. Even though it takes up more space on your disk, it actually I think works out pretty well if you're coming from a film background. In my experience, standard gets you between like 32 and 40 shots, and fine quality gets you between like 20 and 27. So like if you're shooting standard quality, then that's about equivalent to like a 36 exposure roll of film, and if you're shooting the higher fine quality, then that will get you about like a 24 exposure roll. So it actually works out pretty well. It's like one disc is one roll, more or less. And honestly, either way, that's more, with either setting, that's more than I was expecting to get out of or onto a 1.44 megabyte disc. Frame versus field is a little less straightforward, at least to me, like keeping track of which one is which in my brain. According to the manual, field compensates for camera shake, and frame gives you a higher quality image, but is prone to blurry movement. I personally don't see any noticeable increase in quality, but I'm also not really into pixel peeping. Sorry, I just don't care. I'm getting bored just talking about all of these little technical things, so let's just go see how it shoots. Well, I haven't quite yet found my favorite, or a favorite parking deck here, but you know, it's fine. One thing I've noticed about the Mavica, at least this first iteration, is that it really doesn't handle high contrast situations very well. So I thought this would be a good spot to check out the EV adjustment buttons. Here on the left, you've got 1.5 stops underexposed. In the middle, you got your standard, or well, quote unquote standard exposure. And then on the right, you've got 1.5 overexposed. And you can see that it really does make a huge difference. I think the 1.5 stops underexposed looks a lot better than any of the other ones. It's just a matter of learning the camera and looking at your results and figuring out what you want from your pictures. I mean, I guess you could say that about all of photography. That's nice. And just like that, she full. I realized that I had a few test pictures still on the disc, so I got rid of those, cleaned that up a little bit, and then got back to shooting, which that is one really nice thing about having rewritable storage media. And the disc was full again. I was only able to get up to 22 shots this time instead of 24 that I had earlier, but that's one of the things that's frustrating about this camera, is not knowing exactly how many shots you're gonna have. But that's just the nature of dealing with bits and bytes and data, and every shot's a little bit different, so you know, it's just how it goes. But I just loaded up an empty floppy and then headed to another part of town. Now around this time you might be thinking, wow, these pictures don't look great. Assuming that you're viewing this either on your phone or a nice big 32-inch Ultra HD monitor, but that's not really what these pictures were designed for. These are just 640 by 480 pictures, and they actually do look not terrible on like a proper old school CRT screen. So something pretty cool I just found out is that if you hold down the shutter button like halfway, you know, it's supposed to like focus lock or, you know, just focus in general or whatever, but it also, I don't know if it's because of the mode that I have it on, but it also locks the exposure, which is pretty cool because otherwise it's an auto-exposing mess. Like, you know, it's kind of exposing for the highlights, you can't really get any shadow detail in there, right? But then if you go down here, it's exposing for the shadow. But yeah, I'm gonna half press it and then bring it all the way up. And now you've got a lot of shadow detail and, you know, blown out highlights. But still, that's pretty cool. You can use that to your, you know, you can kind of mess around with it to get some cool effects or just exposures. But I still have it held down, and watch what happens when I release it. Yeah, it just goes back to, you know, metering normally. I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. Well, that way you don't have to constantly fidget with your exposure value or compensation settings or anything like that. Because who has time for that? I don't. Means it's about time to head back. It's getting very dark out here, even though it's only 5:30. Since it was getting pretty dark, I figured I'd try out the flash, and well, it works. I had this back in Chicago at VCF Midwest. And yeah, you can kind of see how it does with indoor shots and rendering skin tones and all that. Oh hey, go check out my VCF video if you haven't already. And that about does it for the Sony Mavica FD5. Will I ever use one again? Probably not, to be honest. I wouldn't mind getting my hands on one of the ones with like the optical zoom or video features, or especially if I do get one with video features, one of the ones that has like the memory stick adapter that goes into a floppy disk shape. That way you can get like up to 128 or 256 megabytes on a single disk. And, you know, I mean, that way it'll just let you, I mean, that's literally hundreds of times of more images. But I just really don't have a reason to come back to the FD5. This is fascinating though. It's like it's like a transitional fossil, you know? A relic of a simpler time that ushered in a new way of making and taking photos and ultimately helped spell doom for the old way of doing things. I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. That's all I've got for you today. I'll be on this side of the lens in the next video, so until then. See ya.